Hey everyone, welcome once again to another edition of Huddle Up with Howard. I'm Mike Claiborne along with Howard Richardson. Howard, a lot of things to talk about today when it comes to football. Let's start on the local front with University of Missouri. An off week, they had a chance to get themselves retooled, and the off week came hopefully at the right time. You're hosting Vanderbilt. And Vanderbilt's given Mizzou some problems in the past. So, what do you think the biggest changes you're looking to see compared to the last game Mizzou played?
The changes that I hope to see or that Missouri has certainly addressed, all the issues that they've had in the first part of the season, with excessive penalties, undisciplined penalties, if you will, giving up too many tackles for loss, drop passes, all the things that contribute to your record being 2-4. If you look back at Missouri's last three games, Auburn, Georgia, Florida, they lost those games by a combined total of 14 points. And it's really nothing that those other teams did, especially the number one team in the nation at the time, the Georgia Bulldogs. It was all about Missouri. Again, just making mistakes at critical moments that they could not overcome. When you're playing good teams, they find a way to win. And Missouri, wasn't a good team during those particular games. And I look at the record at 2-4, and I honestly believe that they're a far better team than a 2-4 team. But again, it comes down to mental mistakes. And just not learning how to finish. So in a bye week, when you have a week to address fundamentals, you have a week to look at the mistakes that you typically don't get a chance to do during a normal game week. My hope is that first of all, guys got time off, for mental health, if you will. You kind of walk away from a game. You step away from football, period. You come back refreshed, re-energized. If you've been banged up, you've gotten the treatment that you need, and you come back healthier, I should say, because no one's really healthy. In the midpoint of the season, everyone's is nicked up and they've got aches and pains. But certainly you hope that they've healed enough and they're in a mental state where they've now got a focus of a clearer picture of where they are in order to qualify for a bowl game. Certainly that's just about everyone's goal, is to at least play in a postseason game. You've got to win 4 games to do that. It's a much clearer picture than when you start your season. But it starts with the first game. You got to go 1-0 in order to go forward too. So that's where this team is. I hope that they have been able to sort of gather itself collectively, understanding where that goal is, and be able to be unified once they get on the field every Saturday.
Couple of surprises with Missouri in the first portion of the season. For me, I'm surprised the defense has played well. They've done a really nice job. Probably been on the field a little too long, but I can't overlook their improvement considering what we've seen in the past. The other surprise is how inept the offense is. I thought that this team would be better, not just saying because they had Luther Burden and he's been dealing with an injury, but the whole offense as a whole just doesn't have personality. The offensive line has had some problems. The quarterback situation is not of SEC caliber, and the running game has been in and out. But I guess the one guy who stood out more than anyone else because he's been given a chance is Dominic Lovett.
He has. And so many people have pointed to quarterback Brady Cook as being the issue. And, 2 weeks ago, I think it was, Dominic Lovett was leading the SEC in receptions and yards. If you're a quarterback with problem, you don't have a receiver that's leading the league, through 4 games. So Brady certainly is not playing at the level where they want him to be, but it's all not on Brady Cook either. Receivers have to run the proper routes. The quarterback has to get enough time to find those receivers downfield. But looking at the quarterback position, sometimes the ball has to come out faster. A tenth of a second, a quarter of a second, whatever the case may be. He's got to be able to see the field a little bit better. He's got to find those open receivers. You can't stare down and lock in on one particular receiver because the defense, oftentimes they're looking at where the quarterback's eyes are. And once they see him looking at one particular guy after a few plays, then they know that he's not, wherever he looks, he's going to throw that ball. You give a defender a chance to jump a route, jump coverage, then he's throwing an interception. So he's got to be able to understand how to look off receivers a little bit more and find a quicker outlet or see a guy open downfield much more quickly. Trust his eyes, trust his arm, because he's got the arm to get it there. Again, accuracy comes from practice, just doing it. And that's working with your receivers whenever free time you have outside of meetings and team periods. Whether it's a 25 reps, 50 or 100 before and after practice, those are the things that you must do.
When you look at the SEC, it's such a dominating conference. And we had one of the best games ever between Alabama and Tennessee this past weekend. It was a very good game, but it was poorly officiated. There were just so many things that were wrong with how the officials were working on both sides. And people know me as an Alabama fan, but man, I got to tell you, Tennessee's got to be lodging a complaint too. From where you sit, how's the officiating been this year? From where you sit,
there are always questionable calls in particular games, and I have always advocated for having full-time officials. And I say that because when a guy does something, for 6 other days during the week, his focus isn't necessarily, on the job that he's doing on Saturday. He's got other distractions out there. And you don't typically see the types of plays that have been so controversial. You don't see them enough to be able to make a quicker decision on a particular call. I don't know that we'll ever get there. Some guys are better at it than others, but it would be something that would be, whether at the college level or in the pro level, be something that I think it would not be a bad thing to see with full-time officials.
Here's where I think you're going to have a problem. First of all of these officials we see in the NFL, and certainly in college, have very well-paying jobs where they can get away for the weekend. So you'd have to ask them to give up that career, that job. And most of them wouldn't, because with that job comes a pension and other things of power that they wouldn't receive by being an official. Throw in the fact that we're already short good referees as it is and good officials. That will reduce the pool even more for the ones who wouldn't want to go full time. And thirdly, to have a full-time official, what would he do during the course of the week? Would he be working practices? Would he be watching film? Would he be training with other officials? I mean, the curriculum would have to be one that would certainly warrant him getting it right on Saturday and or Sunday with more efficiency.
That's exactly what I would have in mind. And there's a way to do it. I just don't know. Regardless of my desire and how effective I think it would be, I don't see it happening anytime soon. But you can certainly try. And again, not taking anything away from the officials that are really good. And there are some really good ones out there that are very consistent. We know it's a game where human error is a big factor all the time. That's why you have instant replay. But there's always room for improvement, whether you increase the time for reviewing plays. And I think that's a possibility to do so also. But there's got to be a way to figure out, when you've got officials that are sitting in the league office that are there to assist those officials on the field, they shouldn't be afraid to overrule those officials on the field. It's not that you're making guys look bad. You're trying to make the calls right on the field. And that's what I think. They've just got to be more decisive when you're making those calls from the office. And that's the way I think that you're going to improve the game.
I agree with you. And I see it in other sports. And I'll give you a good example. In baseball, the replay official, if it's a crew chief that's a bang-bang call and they go to New York, 99.9% of the time, the crew chief, they're going to rule in favor of the crew chief. Seldom does he get it wrong. And I think that when you have the same situation, and I'll take one step further in football. How many times have you seen this new network or rules official in the booth, and there's a play that they blatantly kicked, and that rules official will come in and give you some half-ass excuse on why, no, and common sense would tell you that that he kicked it, and that's okay. I get it. But they take care of their own to the point where they've lost credibility in my regard. And I thought Saturday's game with UT, when they were just knocking the poo out of Bryce Young, and there were multiple targeting opportunities for them to throw flags on, and they didn't, just told me that, you know what, they want to take care of their own. So where do you find a legitimate, objective group of people that have football officiating experience to come in and be the true guardian of making sure these rules are going to be run through the right way? And if there is a replay, we're going to get it right.
Well, I think that's when you bring in the commissioner and he sits down with the head of officials and say, we saw what happened in Tennessee, Alabama. We can never afford to have such controversy on such an important game ever again. We've got to do the right thing. Even if it means making an official on the field look bad. Because guess what? Next week, no one's going to remember that official's name for the most part. They're not going to remember that he blew a call against Alabama or he had a call overruled in favor of Tennessee. No one's going to remember that. What they will remember is that the call was made whole, was made proper on the field. But whether it was, in New York, in Birmingham, or whoever the deciding factor is. That's what fans will remember, and that's what they should remember.
You know what I would do? I'd kind of relegate guys. If you kick the call, if your crew was bad against Alabama, Tennessee, then guess what? Next week you might have maybe you got Missouri, Vanderbilt. You go down to the lower level and you hone your skill, and in the group who had the best week, they get the next good game. I think I'd have that. I'd challenge these guys. And you know what? They'd obviously know if they were horseshit. I get it. But I think if you relegate them and put them in a lower game environment where they're not going to be the talk of the town and let them hone their skill and work their way back, I think that's something I would certainly consider, because that's, to me, better than the verbal reprimand where the conference comes out and says, well, yeah, they kicked some calls and, what are you going to do? You're going to fine them? You're going to suspend them? You're already short good referees and line judges and back judges. So to take them off the field completely doesn't serve the purpose, because you want these games to be reasonably officiated by reasonably good people.
Well, I agree with you. But at the very least, whether you kick them down to a lower level game or games, if you will, they should all be reviewing those calls, because guess what? They're going to see them again.
Yes.
The same types of calls. But you've got to be able to know what to look for. What's pass interference? What's a catchable ball? What's targeting? Really look at these things very closely. Be decisive, but be as fair as possible, regardless of, if you're standing on the Tennessee sideline or the Alabama sideline. You got to make the right call to the extent that you can. I have had the good fortune to sit, Mike Kelly and I did, in the Birmingham office where all these officiating calls were made. And I will tell you, they threw some calls at us that were very controversial, that we really had to go, oh, now you can see why officials have it so difficult. But that's what they're there for. That's why they're paid. It's not us sitting in the booth to make those decisions. It's them. But you can see why those calls are difficult to make. However, when you got someone there that's there to either overrule, support, whatever the case may be, they've got to be in those positions to make it right. That's the point that I want to see. If you're there, do the right thing. Make the game, make the right call. Help these guys.
It's funny. This is about 4 years ago. We go to New York and we go to the replay center for Major League Baseball. And they spent like $45 million on this whole operation. And they put us in the chair and they dial up a play. And, you have to kind of figure out all right, I've got 30 seconds or whatever to make this call. And the angles that they have and how they can superimpose things is just incredible what they can do digitally.
Mm-hmm.
And so now you got to make the call. And I get it. And I don't want to berate officials because I can't do it, but I respect it because it's hard.
Yes,
I think officiating, you pick the sport, and I'm going to tell you, it's a whole lot harder than what it used to be. So, but I think we want to give them as many tools as possible to be more consistent. And the tools can consist of video. It can consist of working practices. It
Mm-hmm.
can consist of knowing the rules. It can consist of being in position and have position drills. There's a lot of things that we would use in the term tools that these people could have to be better. But, you know, I just think there's just too much on the line. Now, an official can say to me, well, hell, you guys couldn't convert a third down for the last five possessions. So whose fault is that? So, I mean, it goes both ways. Like in baseball, you know, a guy can chirp about one pitch, but how can you chirp about a pitch when you 0 for 5? You know, so it goes both ways. But I think what we have to do, because we put the officials at a higher standard than anybody else, put a higher standard than the player, higher standard than the coaches. They are the ruler of they pass on the final ruling, and what they say goes, and we feel like they should be fair and impartial with the most power because they have the most credibility to get it right. Yeah. So that's where we're at. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll touch on this a little bit more. We'll stay on college football for a bit. We'll come back after this.
St. Louis Acura has an unbeatable selection of new cars arriving daily, like the all-new 2023 Acura Integra. We also have a great selection of over 200 pre-owned and factory precision courtesy vehicles with finance rates as low as 1.9% for 36 months with approved credit. And we've added Saturday service hours to our newly renovated service facility. Don't forget, we'll buy your vehicle here at our dealership or from the convenience of your home. St. Louis Acura, better than ever for you.
Howard Richards is with us. We call it Huddle Up with Howard. We're talking a little college football. We got off into a little discussion with regard to officiating in college football. All right, while we stay on the subject of college football, Deion Sanders is kind of taking the college football world by storm. He was featured in a very good piece in 60 Minutes this past weekend. And when you think about some of the coaching openings and you think about what Deion Sanders has meant to Jackson State in the SWAC and black college football, give me your thoughts on where we're headed with this, because A, I'm glad he's here. B, in knowing him a little bit and knowing the stories about him, right man at the right time as far as I'm concerned.
He has done a number at Jackson State. Listen, he's had a strong presence and has brought, I think, more relevance, certainly to the Jackson State program, but also back to, he's brought the spotlight back to HBCUs. And I say that because, you know, there have been a number of players that have been overlooked by the, you know, traditional draftniks and clubs. And, you know, they don't always get it right. And, you know, let's just name one that I played with at Dallas. Everson Walls. We came in as rookies together, played at Grambling, undrafted rookie, made the league minimum of $25,000 for his first 2 years, lived at home with his mother. I mean, how many guys do that? And this guy's, he leads the interception and leads the league in interceptions his rookie season. Doesn't even start every game. And he's living at home. I mean, is that not just the great American story? But it just shows that they don't always get it right. Those measurables, there are always guys that are outside those measurables. And I always tell people, if you're good enough, someone will find you. And I think what Deion Sanders has done, he's bringing that light into the realm of historically black colleges and universities. And I think that's a good thing because more young men will get the exposure and the opportunity to play. About Deion and moving on to the next level, Group of Five or Power Five, I think he would make it very interesting for the college football landscape if he gets that opportunity. Does he want that opportunity? Don't know. I'm sure that he will have some opportunities to coach. How seriously he takes those opportunities, how seriously any potential institutions take him will be interesting also. Listen, who knows the game better than Deion? He's a multi-sport athlete. He's excelled in both football and Major League Baseball. He's if you listen to him, if you listen to the message, put all of the other glamour and glitz aside. The guy knows what he's talking to. He has a way of getting that message into the heads of players. They want to play for him because he's done it on that stage. How many college football coaches that are coaching have never played the game? Some have never even played college football, let alone professional football. He's excelled at every level. So you think that, again, just because you're a stellar player does not guarantee success as a coach. But listen, there are those that, to me, that have been good players and have really, I think, stunk it up as coaches. But I think if Deion Sanders wants to coach at a Group of Five or a Power Five institution, he certainly has earned the right to do so. I think for him, if he were going to do so, he's probably going to look for the best fit for him. He's not going to just walk into the first job that he sees just because it looks sexy and attractive to him. I mean, there's a number of things that he needs to ensure because of the uniqueness of him and the uniqueness of the players that he's going to be bringing into the program. He has to understand, and that administration has to understand, where the two sides come together. And they've got to be able to live with this process for as long as he's there.
I think obviously there are going to be some schools that'll kick the tires on him, and he might do the same thing. I think what he's got to look at is, all right, what do they have there? And I think it starts with, what does that line of scrimmage look like on both sides? Do they have some guys that I can coach up? Because if I have an offensive line, I can go find a quarterback. If I get a quarterback, I'm going to find a receiver. If I get a receiver, then I'm going to find some defensive guys that know, hey, look, we got a chance. So it really kind of goes, in increments. But the bottom line is he's going to have a chance to have the pick of what I think will be some intriguing programs. And I know one that comes to mind is Georgia Tech. Now, playing in his own backyard back in the day, that's interesting. Now, Georgia Tech's requirements to get in, a little bit different than Jackson State. So you got to deal with that element as well. But, it also would be interesting to see how long he stays at Jackson State. Maybe he says, I don't see anything that really intrigues me right now. I'm going to stay here as long as my kid's still here. Maybe he wants to stay there and watch his kids play. But the thing is with him, as you mentioned, you take away the glamour and glitz, he's getting something done because they're winning football games. And that's something we have to take into account. This is just not the Coach Prime show. Mm-hmm. He's winning on Saturdays. Now, you may say, well, look who he's playing. Who cares?
That's winning. The schedule. That's the schedule.
Exactly.
You can't help that. That's who they play week in, week out, year in, year out. It's always been that way.
Yeah. So I'm anxious to see where he goes from here because I think he's been good for the game. He almost got the kid from East St. Louis. He finished second in that recruiting to get the big offensive tackle who decided to go to Alabama. And
Miles McVay.
Yeah, who argues about going to Alabama. But for him to be in that discussion, throw in the fact he had the number one defensive back in the country in high school. He had the number two receiver, the young man from St. Louis, Kevin Coleman Jr. Mm-hmm. He has two of the top three players in the country playing for him at Jackson State. And I know the question was asking him, did you ever think about a black college? He said they never recruited him. They never talked to him. And I think there's a lot of guys who might have thought about it. You take away the facilities and you say to yourself, you know what, this might be me. I'm a classic example. I went to a black college and greatest thing that ever happened in my life as far as learning about the game, learning about people, culture, the whole 9 yards. I wouldn't trade that experience for the world. But to see Deion take it to another, because I got to tell you, Howard, we haven't seen black colleges get this sort of exposure since Doug Williams was up for the Heisman Trophy.
You're right. And listen, Doug, Everson, and the scores of other players that have played at these institutions. I'm trying to think of the NFL team that has, and you may be able to answer this, that of its Hall of Fame players, its Hall of Fame players have come from HBCUs, the majority of them. Maybe it's
Is
the
it
Giants.
Pittsburgh?
Pittsburgh or the Giants. So I'm thinking of the Giants. Harry Carson is one. And I can't think of who the other ones. It may not be Pittsburgh. I don't know if it's the Raiders or Pittsburgh may be a good one also. But there is a team out there that of its Hall of Fame players, the majority of them, and when we say majority, we're talking one, two players more than non-HBCUs, but the majority of them have come from HBCUs. Here's the other thing with Deion. Two factors that must be considered if he's able to go to the next level. Jackson State athletics, their budget is about $8 million. Okay, $4 million.
Yeah, well, football's $4 million.
Okay. So think about that. Now, what can he do if he walks into a program that's got a $50 million budget, $100 million budget? Also, name, image, and likeness. Not just the players, but how many corporations would want to associate themselves with Deion Sanders?
Already going on. He's having that take place at Jackson State. But I agree with you. I see where you're going with this, and you're absolutely right. I mean, this guy's a flavor of the month for a lot of different reasons. And just his attraction alone is something that every school would have to take a look at. Now, I know that in his contract, he's got a attendance clause and a few other clauses that kick in. And he'll make all those because he took half his salary. He's only getting paid half his salary because he's trying to make sure his coaches get compensated as well. And when you look at his coaching staff, Howard, there probably aren't 3 people on that coaching staff you'd recognize.
There's one. I know one because I played with him, Dennis
Thurman. Yeah, I'm not sure if he's still there, though.
Well, I know he was there last year.
He was there, right.
Yeah.
But, when you look at some of the other names, you're like, wait a minute, where's this guy coming from? So bottom line is he's developing some coaches that are obviously doing a good job and trying to make sure they get the exposure too. I think it's the best story in the game right now as far as college football, because with all the other things that go on the field and these coaches who are making $8 and $10 million to see what he's doing is great. And if you're one of these schools that, poo-poos Jackson State, I got news for you. If Jackson State is in one of your top recruits' living room, you better be careful because he's there. They're there for a reason. And as I said, if he almost got Miles McVay, he'll get another good player. And he's already proven that. So you can no longer, these Power 5 conferences can no longer poo-poo an HBCU because now that he's proven that you can be successful and help us all if he ends up turning out a couple of high-round draft choices. Then I got news for you. It's game on at that point.
Yeah, it's going to happen, especially if he's there longer term. And there are indications to me that he will be there longer because I think he feels that he owes this to the young man that can't get an opportunity to shine at a big-time program that's been overlooked. I think he feels as though this is what his calling is, to shed light on these types of programs and this type of league and these types of institutions. So I love the story. Kudos to 60 Minutes for highlighting him. I'm just excited to see where it goes from here.
I was thinking about that. When you think about 60 Minutes, I bet 60 Minutes has interviewed a half a dozen coaches, football coaches in its long run. I'm sure Nick Saban's been on there. I believe Mike Leach has been there. And I'm sure there's some other coaches that I can't come to mind right now. But I think for Deion to be able to take his program and take himself to that level just says a lot. And I'm anxious to see where it goes from here because it should be a lot of fun to watch that program grow. All right, before we get out of here, a couple of things about college football this weekend. Not necessarily the knockdown, drag-out games that we've seen over the past weekend, but I'll tell you a game that I'm anxious to see because we don't see them a great deal. This UCLA, Oregon, both teams are ranked, and we don't hear a lot about the Pac-12 anymore, but these two teams have gone fairly well. And now with UCLA with being undefeated and USC getting knocked off, they can run the table here until they run into USC.
And, Chip Kelly was beginning of the season, and people were talking about firing him. Now he's in a position where, he wins 4 or 5 more games. They're possibly in the mix for playing in the college football playoff. So it's not a given. And I don't really know what that strength of schedule has been for UCLA. I don't know who they played in non-conference, but at least they're talking about Chip Kelly again in a more positive light instead of looking for the next head coach. Oregon, didn't start off the season that well. They got smoked by Georgia. But seemingly they have, bounced back or again, there's going to be a lot that happens in college football over the next 6 weeks. I don't know that you can predict. Who would have predicted that Alabama would have dropped or even lost to Tennessee? Yeah, you knew it was going to probably be a good game, be a competitive game, but I think most people probably picked Alabama to win the game. I certainly did. And I just felt that it was going to come down to Tennessee's defense. But listen, they got it done, and that's the bottom line. So that's why you play these games. And I think these games are going to be closer and closer because of all the things we've talked about that have, I think, parity has brought these teams a lot closer. Again, transfer portal, name, image, and likeness. Or I think directly responsible for, why there's the gap is narrowing between more elite teams and the teams below them. Mississippi State, Alabama. That's another game.
That's going to be a scuffle.
Yeah, indeed. There's a number of other big games here, but this is why it's so much interest. It's so interesting this time of the year, watching how the second half of college football. If you don't really follow college football, just start from the midway point of the season. And that's where all the storylines are going to unfold.
Well, that's when the legitimate rankings take place, the middle of the season, because you've gone through enough now. You kind of know who's good and who's still pretending. But in all, it's going to wind up being, as we talked about last week, there's going to be a couple, maybe 3 legitimate teams that are going to be on the outside looking in when it comes to this bowl playoff situation. And they may want to expedite the fact of expanding the playoff picture because these are some legitimate programs that have a lot of money. They're in great TV markets. And I think that's going to have a little bit more to say. So we may now have to wait until 25 to get this done. They may get it done sooner, but it's going to be fun to watch it down the stretch.
Yeah, no doubt.
Howard Richards, we thank you, sir, as always. This has been another edition of Huddle Up with Howard. We'll be back next week to talk a little bit more about this past week's games and what to look forward to, especially the NFL as things are starting to heat up. And don't forget about those Philadelphia Eagles. And by then, maybe Dak Prescott will be back as well. So for Howard, I'm Mike. We thank you for checking us out. This has been another edition of Huddle Up with Howard on ClaibsOnline.com.